Great. Well, welcome everyone to another webinar in the ODA series, where we bring along our associates, who we are delighted to have with us, to talk to you about an issue that impacts the dating sector and solutions that are out there for it. So today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Active Fence and two people who I know really well and I know are incredibly knowledgeable about these issues. So we have Inbal Goldberger.
Active Fence. And then apologies. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. I think you're breaking up, so it might be your internet connection.
Yes, I think I'm having a headphone issue. So I'll just say, and Poran, who is VP of Solution Strategy. I'm going to hand over to them to kick off, just to say, please talk to each other in the chat function. Please use the Q&A. We'll come back to the questions at the end. This is recorded, so you'll get a copy afterwards, and I'll come back and chat to you more at the end and sort this out while I let them go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. And it's not just so. Hello, everyone. I'm Inbal Goldberger. I'm the VP of Trust and Safety at Active Fence. We are a technology company, and we work with online platforms to help the trust and safety teams to make safe from various types of harms. Along with me, my colleague Tom.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Tomer. I'm our VP Solution Strategy. Basically means I work with our large towards them, as well as just working on our next generation of taking us to market in new areas. As Inbal mentioned, we've been in trust and safety for many years, really only for the past two. So kind of leading the charge of Active Fence into these new markets and industry and doing trust and safety and threat intelligence specifically. And yeah, excited to talk.
Thank you. I will just adjust here my screen so we can present. And Tomer, tell me if you can see my screen.
Yeah, that works.
And let me just adjust it here. Yeah, looks okay. So again, hello. I'm very excited to be here. Today we will make the case for intelligence in trust and safety. So I guess we don't need a full introduction to trust and safety, but for those of you who are less through building safer products and enforcing product policies. Critical element of trust and safety is threat intelligence that allows online or dating platforms, in our case, to be ahead of abuse, to anticipate, be able to mitigate them on time. I guess it's not new to you that online platform, an adversarial environment, bad actors exploit platforms and may cause harm. Intelligence fits in trust and safety. I'll start with a quick introduction. The life cycle of trust and safety. The cycle starts with the creation of a product. It could be a dating app or a feature within the app, for example. Platforms that are in an advanced state throughout the development of new products, they develop safe product, what we call safety by design, from reporting mechanisms, block lists, safety preferences, anything that can safeguard the users. And along with a policy, or we plug it into an existing policy, but most important, define the rules of the road that guide the usage of the platform. To the detection part. In this phase, we use from user flagging to monitoring efforts to automation, embedded classifiers. So anything that can raise a flag over a risk to harm users. And harm is detected either automatically or manually. And then we move to the enforcement phase. So flagged content can be removed or demonetized or deleted, or any other type of enforcement, like putting something behind an interstitial. It may be enforced, or it might as well not be enforced against. For example, if Trust and Safety made a decision that there's no violation of a policy in flagged content. And after the enforcement phase, we move to the analysis stage. So we look back at all the cases of abuse we found, at all the cases of abuse we didn't find, at all the cases of abuse we enforced against or did not enforce against, and we ask ourselves, like, what is the common thread of all these harms? Did we catch it fast? Could we prevent it from happening in the first place? And if we found harm, but we couldn't remove it, what was the reason? So we ask ourselves these questions. And there's a lot of wisdom analysis stage, because afterwards we take all the insights and we improve the product. For example, we add better safety mechanisms, or we improve our, for example, we make it more precise or wider, or just add elements that were not covered before. Now, a small teaser, many times in the aftermath, we say, oh, I wish I knew there was a plan to conduct a coordinated attack against LGBTQ. If someone just had alerted me, I could have spared the harm caused. But ideally, after this stage, we or policy or our processes, and we complete the cycle stronger. And as you may know, the cycle doesn't end here. So because Trust and Safety is an adversarial space, actors will continue to find ways to abuse, to harm, and to evade protection mechanisms. Here's a simple example. Let's say we launched a product with a policy, and we run into the environmentalists. This is just an example. We don't hate it. And safety mechanisms are embedded in the product that it's very easy to detect and to enforce against. For some reason, you didn't have a classifier or a rule to detect this. You will very quickly improve the product, you will improve the classifier, and you will catch it the next time it happens. So we move rather quickly from product and policy to detection and analysis and improvement. But with this, your human eye, especially if you're a lead speech native, a machine doesn't. So this example shows that we start a new cycle, a new life cycle again, only because we didn't anticipate that the word environmentalists can be used in the lead speech. If we had known that, we could have spared the harm that was caused. We substituted by special characters, and then we added to the get out of the circle, safer and stronger. But what about this? If there is another way to say the same word, this may also slip through. So we see here a tree, the tree huggers, it means the same thing. So this shows how automatic action lags behind abuse involvement. We can't catch it in time unless we have context and knowledge about the abuse ecosystem, which brings back to the life cycle and the endless nature of it. Even with best detection, always encounter new types of abuse. And let's try to get some examples that can appear on profiles or messaging in dating apps. Let's say this message was sent to a user, perfect example of a land whale. I guess that all of you feel toxic and too hateful to be allowed on your platform, and you probably already have mechanisms to that could be a shower thought or an app of all women's sports and have one giant women's Olympic that sandwich making, laundry, and bad driving competitions. So again, this falls under probably ban this. But what about this? A profile wearing a cap and a hoodie. You probably need a bit more context, like what's this look? Like most people without any context would vote to keep it. In 2019, the US Department of State deemed Al-Hayat an alias of a foreign terrorist organization. And with that, allowing a user to wear this picture on your dating app is prohibited. And why am I telling you this? Because in order to make decisions, you sometimes need more context and subject matter expertise to make decisions, and in areas that you maybe have less visibility into. Now, the examples that I use here show violation side of things. And as you may know, in the dating industry, the scarier threat actors are less on the content side and more on the behavioral side. So a lot of their tactics and their invasion techniques are discussed outside of the platform, where platforms usually have less visibility into. And for example, we found this chat in a child predators forum. It reads like this: better you find a single woman with a daughter of at least 2 years old, and in a short time you gain her trust, and it's easy for you to have relationships with a child. Look on a specific app that I removed. There are several new singles with daughters, sons. This type of intel can inform policy decisions. And I mean, or at the very least, it gives us understanding of the ways our platform can be exploited. And to catch this type of behavior, you need to have access to the places where means and methods of bad actors are shared, the channels where they discuss the vulnerabilities of dating platforms. And in a few slides, Tomer will share more examples we collected recently. These examples will show how scammers, sextorters, incels, sex workers, drug dealers are discussing how to exploit dating apps to promote their interests. So now, during the time we were missing on this intel, a harm could have spread, as well as complaints about our platform. And this bears several risks: user harm, obviously, reputational harm, regulatory non-compliance. A strong trust and safety works to prevent these harms before they manifest on the platform. And I'm going back to the trust and safety life cycle to propose a shortcut that might help us reducing the path between harm detection and enforcement. And the shortcut is intelligence. Intelligence helps us gain visibility into the sources of chatter outside of our platform, where bad actors are discussing tactics, techniques, and procedures, and where they coordinate attacks. Many times they share tips, they brag about their achievements. In the dating industry, intelligence is mostly gathered in closed forums, in messaging channels, or in underground groups. Intelligence analysts develop their sources, they gain access and constantly collect information from these sources. And when we look at trust and safety as an organization, intelligence informs three functions within the trust and safety org. The first is policy. Intelligence identifies potential harm that is not covered by a policy. For example, we recently found that sex workers recommend using dating apps to drive traffic to their dedicated channels on porn sites. And their profiles are genuine, but obviously they're not, they don't have intentions to engage in dating, but rather to use the app as a gateway. And the policy of the app did not cover this kind of scenario, so they could not enforce against this behavior even if found. But with this intel, it was possible to change the policy and to close the gap. The second function is product. In underground forums, for example, people are selling bots that create user profiles at scale. And we noticed a combination of factors they are using, like specific professions, like finance, army, investment, combined with AI-generated photos. All these signals can be used to build alerting rules in the product. And the third function is operations. So scammers have, funnily enough, manuals they work with on how to engage with their victims, how quick they should move away from the dating app to a different messaging app. These manuals are goldmine for tactics of scam, and they include keywords and other signals that can inform enforcement mechanisms.
Thanks, Inbal. Actually, before you move on to the examples, just a few things to add to what Inbal mentioned here. We talked about how threat intelligence is a great way to essentially reduce that cycle that Inbal showed, right? It's a great way to find these threats before teams notice them through their analysis. Right, through looking at all the moderated items, through all the user complaints, and then understanding the methods bad actors are working, and then adding those classifiers. Well, threat intelligence can definitely shorten that cycle, add those classifiers quicker, detect quicker, and so on. It's also a great way, and we kind of distinguish this with a lot of our customers, between detecting emerging threats, what we call unknown unknowns, things you didn't know about that were happening. Inbal gave a great example with, did you know that your app is being targeted by sex workers or being discussed by sex workers? Is a great way to drive traffic. Great, this is kind of a new threat I didn't know existed on my platform for the, really for the trust of my customers. It's also a great way to know what's called the known unknowns. A lot of teams come to us and say, we know that XYZ is happening, this kind of phenomenon, this kind of fraud is happening on our platform, but we don't know how they're doing it, where they're doing it, who they're targeting, where they're coming from, what maybe methods or tools, or abusive malware or whatever they're using. We're just not sure. And threat intelligence is a great way to kind of investigate those causes. And that's, again, something that could lead to shortening that cycle. Another thing I'll point, and actually, Inbal, if you could pass it to the cycle for a second. We talk about detection here. I think what a lot of the more advanced trust and safety teams that we meet in the market talk to us about is moving from reactive to proactive, moving from detection to protection, right? Having more resilience. And I think that even one level higher than that is moving to deterrence. How do we not only detect threat actors when they're performing harm on our platform, not only protect our platform, making it harder for threat actors to attack our platform, but adding deterrence. One of the things that we've seen be very effective in creating deterrence for threat actors, and I'll say how we're seeing this in a second, is shortening that cycle. If you're a threat actor and the platform you're trying to abuse is noticing, to take Inbal's environmentalist example from earlier, is noticing the new iterations of the word environmentalists in the context of abuse on your platform, and it's not taking 2 months, it's taking 5 days, it oftentimes means that these threat actors that are on this platform to abuse environmentalists in this example might migrate to a different platform, might be deterred from iterating again. And that's especially, here it's language, but when we're talking about complex fraud methodologies, if you're quicker to detect and deflect these kinds of attempts of abuse, it goes a great length to deterring these threat actors from performing harm.
Yeah, and just to complete your thought, an amazing evidence of deterrent you can find, if you find in underground forums someone saying, "Oh, don't even bother. This platform is just too hard for us to penetrate." This is a great example. And when we think about threat intelligence, most of us go to the kind of negative side, exposing how we are weak. But many times it's used as an evidence to show that actually you are doing a good job. And when they say, just don't try even to go there, they're too good, it's also a nice evidence of, knowing you're doing the right things to protect your users.
Yeah, I could say that when we bring this kind of chatter to our customers, it's a great show of the programs are working. Maybe even not an implementation we had anything to do with, right? You added a new identity verification, you added a new background process, a different vendor that now protects from payment fraud. Whatever you did, threat intelligence can tell you, hey, the bad guys are saying it's gotten harder. The bad guys are saying they're migrating. The bad guys are saying whatever accounts are now too expensive to buy. The ROI is not there. That's great confirmation programs are working. Obviously, if threat actors say the opposite and say, hey, they just added this new vendor, it allows you to add Gen AI imagery very easily, much better than before, then it's a great sign to know that maybe something's not working. We often also discuss this issue in trust and safety, that one of the common proxies for understanding if prevalence and harm is increasing on the platform, decreasing, is user flags. And oftentimes user flags can actually be a misleading indicator, because if perhaps you're not catching, perhaps your monitoring is not good enough, so you'll get less flags into your moderation queue. But actually, the threat intelligence angle can add visibility and say, oh, we're just not catching it, but threat actors are saying that they're just using this kind of evasion methods. That's why we're not catching it. So it's a great way to give a true indication of harm and prevalence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just completed my thought on, kind of piggyback on what you say. There's a lot of valuable data inside the platform. And going outside of the platform is just something you don't have resources to do. And I appreciate that many platforms would like to do this, but it's a different profession, different skills. And just going outside, developing these sources, finding the relevant information and bringing it back is the great combination of threat intel, how just collecting things from the outside and connecting the dots inside. So I will leave this thought with you, and I'll completely move the torch to you if you want to continue to more examples, or just to
Yeah, sure. I'll continue to some examples, and I'll maybe just preempt these examples by saying that one of the effective ways that we've been helping dating companies, and you'll see this in these examples, is finding what we call TTPs, right? Techniques, tactics, and procedures of threat actors operating. Oftentimes, when we find these TTPs, right, being discussed, it's sometimes confirms suspicions platforms have. Sometimes it reveals a threat that they didn't even know existed. The main purpose of finding these TTPs, and maybe go on to the first example, and you'll understand what I mean by these. But if you look here, this is a chat, a Telegram chat that we found that is dedicated to discussing, recommending methods, recommending content, recommending platforms, and so on, to be used for different romance scams. Here they're talking about this idea that you want to drive urgency, right? Whether it's so someone transfers you money or something like that. And to create urgency, they say you don't want to say that you're living out of town. You want to tell them that you work a lot, you travel. Here is a few jobs. Why you need urgency in that payment, but don't say that you live out of town, because that's a turnoff. So obviously you're going to have benign users that are perfectly fine, that are contract engineers, travel a lot for work, and still might want to urgently talk to someone on your dating platform. But in the world of fraud, and I'm sure that any of you on this webinar that work in fraud have heard this expression, fraud versus friction, right? The more friction you add, the less fraud you have on the platform. The less friction, the more fraud you have, and there is a balance to the two, right? You don't want to put so much friction that your platform becomes unbearable, and you don't want to put no friction so that fraud is prevalent. One of the I think kind of I guess knowledge in this area is that if you can differentiate between different interactions and different users and place friction accordingly, you're gonna see great results in terms of reduction in fraud. So perhaps understanding that while this interaction can be benign between a contract engineer who wants to urgently talk to someone on the platform, it's a great sign, it's a great signal for fraud. And maybe here you can add a prompt to the user warning them. Maybe here you want to do an extra verification on the identity of the person who says they're a contract engineer. Maybe you want to send a human moderator or even an investigator to do OSINT work to see if this person truly is who he says he is or she is, and so on. So it's basically indicators of harm. You can move to the next example, Inbal. Here we found on a dark web forum explaining how to use a certain dating app to generate traffic. Some of the intelligence that we pick up is valid for any dating platform. Some of them are very specific to a dating platform, right? So this is to a specific dating platform. This one discusses a very specific dating platform and the features and functionalities that this dating platform has that lend itself to traffic generation, which is, again, a form of unaccepted use in dating platforms. And they're talking about specific features on how to do it. They're giving specific tips and so on, and this will greatly add those kind of signals of fraud that I mentioned earlier. Here we track, besides romance scams, we work with our customers on all forms of abuse in dating platforms. Even outside of dating, we deal not a lot, but considerate amount with the community. Dating platforms, it's a bigger concern. But here you could see that on, again, a dark web forum, For incels, they're talking about how to abuse different women and how to find them, which ones to target, different indicators. And this is again another example. One thing that we track for our customers, and we try to find not only the signals, the behavioral signals of people who are trying to do harm, maybe the characteristics of a threat actor and the profile they'll generate, but we can also find the characteristics of the victims they target, right? Inbal mentioned earlier, I wish I knew that people were going to do raids on LGBT chat rooms on my app. Oftentimes, by listening to threat intelligence, we can tell who the victims are going to be, when they're going to target them, maybe characteristics of the victims that they're trying to target, and that can give platforms an ability to maybe add another layer of protection around these instances, these users. Can move to the next example here. Something that we've seen a lot in 2023, not that it didn't exist before, but the use of bots and bots generator all across all of the customers we help with, and we work in the gig economy, sharing economy, obviously social media, messaging, file hosting, file sharing, web hosting, lots of different industries. We've seen a huge increase kind of across the board in the use of bots, and specifically, I'd say in dating and social media for profile generating bots. Not only are we detecting these new bots because platforms are constantly fighting off these kind of bots and making them, essentially not work on their platforms, but threat actors are quite quick in this game to come up with new bot generators, new profile generators, things that will bypass the defenses of companies. This can be a problem. Like we've seen customers realizing maybe 6-7 months late that they have 100,000, 200,000, and even much higher numbers of fake users generated by bots and managed by bots on their platforms. The ability for us to go into the ecosystems that we're finding these new bots, and I say us, but it's really kind of any threat intelligence program that goes and finds these tools, and oftentimes these tools are specific to a platform, that they're finding these tools, and we're able to understand how this tool works, reverse engineer it. We can run it on a profile while alerting the team that we're doing so they can see how it behaves in the back end. We find the fingerprints of these bots. Oftentimes, another thing that we engage in is what we call proactive engagement, where we actually discuss this bot and how to use it and how it works with the threat actors themselves, bringing additional intelligence that teams can use to disrupt the operation of these bots generators. I think that generally threat actors, and this is again a comment for across the board, all industries, have gotten more tech savvy, not necessarily because they are more technological, but the economy for different tools, abusive tools online, cyber tools online, to be used by folks looking to harass, to folks looking to commit fraud. There's just an abundance of it, and it's something that teams have to really prepare for.
Amazing, thank you, Tamar. I love these examples. They show a well-rounded threats. I want to ask you more questions so we can move to Q&A. I'll stop sharing now because I think we can have a discussion rather than a presentation.
Thank you so much. I have learned so much in the last 35 minutes. And can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yeah, much better.
Okay. hopefully this will continue. So please, everyone who's on the call, do put your questions into either the webinar chat or to the Q&A, but I'm going to kick off with a few of my own questions that I thought of while we were running through. And the first one is, you started to talk about bots and talking about the future. Everything anybody wants to talk about right now is generative AI and how AI is going to play a role in this. I was wondering if you could share a bit about what you're seeing on that front, on the threat side, and how your threat intelligence could support dating services as this new threat comes online.
Yeah, I can tell you a few things that we've seen in the generative AI space. We've seen a lot of apps using different forms of photo verification, and we see a lot of chatter of threat actors on how to utilize these tools for bypassing this kind of photo verification. If you can imagine, I've seen some of these kind of IDVs use up to 100 different prompts around photos, right? Put two fingers from your right hand on your nose, different things like that. Initially, what we saw threat actors reacting to that was offering photo packs of, here's 100 photos of, this model for, I'm just giving an example from an e-whoring scam that we detected, and they were selling these kind of big photo packs to bypass that. Well, a lot of platforms now said, okay, let's have the prompt choose from maybe 2,000 different types of prompts that you can give someone. And that would be very difficult for threat actors to create these massive photo packs for. But then what threat actors are now discussing is, okay, well, whatever prompt it is, we have a model. We can get the generative AI text to image to just follow that prompt. So it kind of makes obsolete all these systems of photo verification. So that's one of these emerging threats that we're seeing in the space. We've seen generative AIs be used for fake profiles for quite a while now. But I think that one of the things that a lot of people are afraid of with the emergence of such good generative AI is that it will be harder and harder to detect. We've been able to detect AI-generated profile pictures for a while. It's always been a cat and mouse of the technology gets better, detection gets better. But now there is, we're seeing a lot of chatter of folks saying that it's now undetectable, which is not entirely true, but it's definitely gotten much, much harder to detect. Yeah, go ahead, Inbal.
I'm just thinking that another trend that we've seen is using, it's on the other side of Gen AI and dating apps, to create high quality, non-consensual imagery, intimate imagery. Many times these AI tools use photos from dating apps because they are very clear, high quality. So it's showing how just very benign photos of genuine users can be used eventually against them, just because they are high quality. So it's another trend we see.
Yeah, we saw now, I think recently in a report we delivered to one of our dating customers, a specific mention in incel forums about here is what you should ask from your Gen AI profile picture generator. Again, it's one of those things that, hey, if someone has these 5 features and we see a heavily trafficked incel forum recommending these 5 features because they've tested, and it's the best way to get to their targets, maybe that's another additional sign of friction, right? I'm not saying that you can't have these 10 features as a real human, but maybe it's something that should alert suspicion, especially if it's a new user, combined with other risk signals. Then they don't have a link to their social media. They don't there's different risk signals that combined with these attributes of a person, maybe that's a generative AI photo. So we're definitely seeing that usage over there. Inbal mentioned like the use of Gen AI in NCII, right, in non-consensual intimate imagery. If you needed to create again, to go back to the EHOR, those not for me, a dating profile that's set up in order to target someone to ultimately sell them intimate imagery. There is a rise in the amount of intimate imagery that is AI generated. So you can imagine even someone with taking a real profile, creating generative AI non-consensual intimate imagery from that real profile. Maybe it's a real Instagram personality or something like that. So impersonation is on the rise with generative AI, and that's obviously going to get to the dating platforms. Not that impersonation was not an issue. I personally have friends who have been impersonated on dating platforms. It's always difficult when that happens. But if now the continuation of that kind of harm operation was not only to impersonate a real person, but then to actually distribute intimate imagery of that person that's AI generated, makes that harm, tenfold. So I guess maybe just an add-on to that risk that we're seeing with Gen AI is specifically around CSAM, right? We're seeing a lot of chatter, and I think it was one of the first harm areas that Act Defense noticed a peak in discussion around generative AI is the CSAM chatter. We do a lot of work on child sexual abuse material, and dating apps are not prone, are not immune to distribution of CSAM on them. So another huge risk to really anyone in user-generated content that cares about CSAM, which is the majority, I'm glad to say, of platforms. Generative AI is definitely an increased risk for that.
Thank you. That was so comprehensive. And just picking up on that, how fast, so basically about kind of what's happening in the forefront of harm and fraud and other issues, like in generative AI. How quickly do you pick up on what the bad actors are now doing? How quickly does that go through, your teams, and how much faster really is the dating service getting that information than going through the rest of the cycle that you showed us?
Highly variable, because ultimately some platforms will pick up on a specific type of harm after 3 weeks. Maybe we could have cut it to a week. Some of them, I mentioned in the bot space, customers can go on for over a year not knowing that 20-30% of their users are bots. They could suspect things but not be able to action them, right? Because there are several stages. There is, I mentioned earlier, something is happening. You see the complaints, but you don't know who's doing it, why, where. So it could be that, from the moment that you understand that something is happening, from the moment it starts to happen till you understand that harm is happening, that could be a period. And then till you know how to mitigate that harm, that's another period. Potentially we could shorten, but threat intelligence can shorten both of those cycles. And those cycles could be 6 months and it could be 3 weeks. And we could shorten them sometimes by 30%, sometimes by 90%. So it does vary quite a lot. Hopefully that answers your question in a very uncertain way.
No, I think that's great. I mean, sorry, Inbal, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that it really depends on the sources. And again, I'm talking from a discipline of intelligence. I come from a military intelligence background, and sometimes you already have these sources where this information exists at hand. So you have your eyes and ears in these channels, these forums that discuss it. You can pick it right away. And as Tor said, sometimes it's like, we know something wrong is happening. Let's develop more sources. Let's just move from one source or one channel to another to to increase the visibility that we have. So it really depends. But sometimes it could be as quick as harm does not even manifest. So we just understand that there's an intention to abuse, and you just catch it right away, and there's nothing to report on because nothing happened, which is great. I mean, if you can prevent harm before it shows that's the best thing. Which kind of leads me to a question that, Tomer, you probably get a lot on the topic of how can you prove the return on investment, the ROI of intelligence, if in so many cases there's no crisis that is apparent that you solve. It's something you solve before it happens. So how can you prove that it's valuable? So how do you think about it, Tomer?
Yeah, definitely a question we get asked a lot. And, at the crux of it, there is the big issue that, when there is a failure of intelligence, as we could see from recent global geopolitical events, everyone knows there is a failure of intelligence. When intelligence is good and you were able to preempt harm, who knows what kind of risk you prevented? Maybe it was a blimp, and maybe it was something that would have caused your stock to go down by 20%. It's very hard to know once you've mitigated the risk what could have transpired, and that's true for any form of risk. So that needs to be said almost in the beginning of every threat intelligence ROI conversation is, we could easily point at catastrophes that happened from a trust and safety perspective in different companies, and we could point to the possibility that intelligence could have preempted and mitigated that. And of course, that's not an ROI calculation for your company. It just goes to show that sometimes when you don't have it in place, disasters happen. And again, this is something that can be said for almost any risk mitigating solution. And we just know that trust and safety disasters do happen, and they're quite big when they do happen. And sometimes they're a huge reputational issue, but sometimes they cause a lot of churn. And what did we see 2 weeks ago? Omegle, the platform with millions of users, shut down completely because of trust and safety issues, right? So trust and safety can harm your company. It could kill your company. And and usually it's not the paper cuts that do it. It's the big kind of things like, romance scams or Tinder swindlers and things like that that have huge negative impacts. And with intelligence, you could clearly point a path at how they could have been prevented. So with a lot of our customers, one of the things that we do to check for ROI, and when we kind of meet quarterly or annually to look at performance of threat intelligence of that department and how we supported them, we try to look at what we call golden findings, right? What are big things that we found out that potentially could have developed into a snowball kind of disaster situation? And the other thing that we always tell teams is, if you can recall Inbal's kind of Venn diagram showing threat intelligence sitting between operations, policy, and enforcement, between enforcement, operations, policy, and product teams. What we often point to them is how many times during this quarter or year, the period that we're reviewing, how many insights did you provide these different departments? Because those departments have measurable KPIs, right? Enforcement, it's how many flags are you taking down, how much proactive detection, same thing with product, right? The detection models that you built in or integrated with, how much harm are they catching proactively? Policy, obviously, was your policy well understood? Were there gaps in your policy? Or, moderators, how many times did moderators moderate incorrectly because they misunderstood policy? There's a lot of clear KPIs for these departments. Threat intelligence really tries to provide insights for these departments so they can do their job better. So in any of the KPIs I just gave as an example, you could see how, to take Inbal's environmentalist comment, right? Threat intelligence saw in different anti-environmentalist groups, different emojis being shared and saying, hey, these platforms don't pick up this, this way of writing. And let's say we caught that, let's say we caught that through threat intelligence. And we said, hey, you might not be seeing a high volume of flags about environmentalists complaining that they're being harassed on the platform yet, but here is an emoji symbol to add to your detection model. And suddenly, the detection of this abuse increased. And who's going to get credit for it? The product team, right? But essentially, what we tell threat intelligence teams is how many insights did you pass to these departments, and they implemented them, right? Because it's kind of hard to know the effect downstream. But for me and for the threat intelligence teams we work with, if they were able to provide 100 different insights that policy, product, and enforcement teams took action on, right, made a change to their enforcement guidelines, made a change to the policy, and so on, that for me is ROI.
Thank you. That's fantastic explanation of the value of threat intelligence. And just picking up on that, within the ODA, we have lots of different size members. How should you approach threat intelligence if you are a startup? If you have 5 members on your team, you're kind of just starting to build your content moderation stack of services. How do you start the thought process on threat intelligence?
Yeah, you're right, Hannah, that a lot of what we described here today is kind of a very robust system, utilizing a vendor like ActDefense, which while we have solutions that are, kind of more programmatic, API-based, software-based solutions, our threat intelligence solutions run on the more expensive side. So several hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to use us as a vendor. And I would say that most of the platforms that we work with a threat intelligence counterpart. Smaller platforms will work with usually someone on the enforcement team. Oftentimes we have platforms that have an investigator or an investigation team. That's also a great point of contact for us to work with. But I would say it starts there, right? It starts with having someone on the team. For a smaller platform, it might be a part of a role, medium-sized platform might be a full role, but that job form, whether that is in an investigatory capacity, and the ideal is in an intelligence collection capacity, where you're not only saying, here's a problem, let me look on Discord and on Telegram and on the dark web to see maybe I find a little more information about this process. And the larger platforms, you're proactively collecting intelligence. You're not waiting for harm to happen and investigating it. You're out there listening and monitoring, in our case, millions of these sources of chatter for potential harm and mentions of your platform. But I would say for the smaller platforms, even having an investigator that is looking at problems being floated by the agents, the moderators, and being able to provide that additional context. It doesn't have to be all-encompassing and exhaustive, like I mentioned, but even at that capacity, it can do a lot of good in shortening that cycle.
And I would say maybe joining something like the Online Dating Association as a small startup to start having those conversations, like with fantastic associates like yourself and with other members who might be seeing things that you're not seeing on a small platform. So we've got 4 minutes left, and I've got one last question from the attendees, and then we'll sign off. So it's kind of a broad question, so you can answer it as succinctly as you'd like. But what are some of the ways to gather off-platform intelligence? And how do you efficiently review it? So obviously that's part of what your product is, but maybe you can give us a quick overview of an answer to that question.
Yeah, sure. There are, obviously I would say ActDefense is one way to do it. Essentially what you're getting with, with an outsourced intelligence is the fact that we work with a lot of dating companies. We work with a lot of social media companies. These platforms and these industries are very interlinked, right? You could even see in a basic harm, where someone will move from a dating app to a messaging app to a file storing app, and having that visibility across industries is important. And there's an economy of scale there, obviously, by using a vendor. But even if you're looking to do something smaller scale, there is tools out there, or there are software tools out there that enable this kind of monitoring of access only chatter. It is a lot of work, and it is heavily professional human work, right? We hire a lot of people that come from the intelligence community that are experts in getting access to even these types of sources. There is a lot of off-platform sources that doesn't necessarily have to come from the deep and dark web, which is a little more complicated. Even if you're not gonna shorten that cycle by 90% because you saw the Telegram chatter that starts to mention this new tool, there's quite a lot of open web sources to look for intelligence on, and at least cut the cycle somewhat by looking at those sources. So there's definitely sources of kind of broader intelligence sharing that happens on the open web, and forums on the open web, right, that you can find on Reddit discussions of new types of harms, not necessarily in those deep and dark sources.
I'll just mention like one tip. If you want to start small and not go for full-blown intelligence, services or something like this, and do something, you can just create a small workflow with mentions of your platform. Just look for your name and what people are talking about you, and that would be just the tip of the iceberg that you can start digging and find out more. But if you're very limited in your resources and you want to do a bit, do this. Just look how you are being mentioned, and you will find some insights, insights. So that would be my small tip.
That's a great tip, I think, especially for those startups who want to get it right from the start, but maybe can't do everything immediately. So we've come to the end of our webinar. A huge thank you to everyone who joined us today. A huge thank you to Inbal and Tomer for coming and sharing with us, answering our questions. This is recorded, so everyone will get a copy afterwards. You can watch it back. I'm going to watch it back, I know, and take some notes on all the great evidence you shared with us. You'll also be able to get in touch with Inbal and Tomer if you want to talk to Active Fence more about what they do. If you have further questions that we didn't get to, you'll be getting a follow-up email from us, and we can pick it up from there. And if you did enjoy this webinar and you are a dating service or you are a vendor, do consider joining us and becoming part of our community of best practice in the online dating space. So once again, a huge thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, everyone. Bye.